Our speaker this morning is the Reverend Linda Hart Green. Reverend Green was ordained 40 years ago and practiced ministry within the American Baptist Churches, USA. She served pastorates in New Jersey and was on the regional ministry team in Massachusetts. She received her theological education from Princeton Seminary, from which she holds the Master's of Divinity degree and an advanced certificate in pastoral leadership development. She also was trained in applying family systems theory to congregations, and while on the Massachusetts staff, she developed, trained, and supervised teams of laity and clergy who helped her work with churches in conflict. She is married to Reverend Harry Green, who is Penny Reed, my brother, and a retired district executive and pastor for the UUA. They retired about 6 years ago to Fernandina Beach. Linda has enjoyed attending the Nassau branch of this congregation with her sister-in-law, me, occasionally. The Greens are members of New Vision UCC, a progressive Christian denomination congregation in Yulee, and Linda coordinates their community outreach ministry. And I'm proud to say she's not only my sister-in-law, she's my really good friend.
Yeah, she's not making that up. We like to hang out. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you this morning. And I realize I'm an outsider to your congregation. And I know probably when you heard American Baptist and you're in the South, not that kind of Baptist, okay? I am known to my friends at the Nassau branch. Hi, guys. But really, still, it's a lot for me to presume that I have something to say to you, because I'm aware that you're going through a particularly emotionally wrenching and stressful time as a congregation. And this has been compounded this week by Tyler's resignation, as we heard as he explained that to the children and young people. So it's difficult here we are, January, facing a new year when you have a lot of work to do. But you must move forward slowly, carefully, like ice skaters checking to see if the ice will hold. I have walked alongside other congregations in your shoes. I have been through a congregational conflict as a pastor. I have a great deal of empathy for you. But two factors make my previous experience different from what you are facing. The first is that the external political climate was not in the upheaval that it is today. Rancorous language, taking sides, have become normal. And our skills for good listening have deteriorated, if we ever had them at all. The second factor is that electronic communication and social media were not as ubiquitous as they are today. Now, while there are many advantages to these forms of communication, I believe they do not serve us well when we're trying to build the fabric of a religious community. In church, where genuine dialogue needs to take place, that can only happen face to face. Communication electronically is expedient. I use it frequently myself, but it is fraught with the possibilities for being misunderstood. So I'll date myself to say, as someone who used to watch the show Lost in Space in the 1960s, danger, warning, Will Robinson. And that's my 2 cents on that issue. On to my topic. Agree to differ, resolve to love. I found this saying on a banner in a church social hall. It was very large, impressive, and impossible to miss. You could see it when you were having coffee or a discussion after church. And here is how this became this one congregation's motto. The church was in a city in New England, located immediately adjacent to a prestigious university. The building was from the 1850s and sat right on the town square. It was stone with large stained glass windows, very impressive. And the youth met in a place called the Tower Room. It was kind of funky and spooky, and it was away from prying adult eyes. And one Sunday, as the youth were meeting up there, mortar started falling on the youth. So, like youth will, they started poking at the stones. And they were loose. So in an uncharacteristic move of maturity, they got the heck out of there and went to tell the adults what had happened. Because, you see, the week prior, they started digging the foundation of a new hotel next door. And disturbing that earth brought to light a painful reality. That church building was crumbling. Crumbling. Decades of deferred maintenance had come home to roost. So the construction had to halt while they put this giant scaffold over the entire place, so the church leaders could figure out what in the world they were going to do. Structural engineers came in and gave them even more bad news. It would cost as much to tear the whole thing down as it would to restore. This particular congregation prided itself on its outlier status in our denomination, housing every conceivable kind of group. They had an openly gay pastor, to the great chagrin of our officials. But the voices inside the congregation had called for building maintenance. They were routinely overruled. Money was for outreach, not maintenance. So when this crisis happened, the maintenance voices started, "We told you so, we told you so." But that wasn't very helpful. I told Penny that I had not thought about this church's story for a very long time until I was asked to speak to you. Because I think the metaphor of their need for external scaffolding spoke to me. There's nothing wrong with needing some external help in being held up for a while. I know. We don't like to ask for help. I had to use a walker after I had knee surgery. I hated that. But there's no shame in needing help. There is only regret in not availing yourselves of it. Any process with which I have worked requires time and patience. Time and patience are scarce commodities when you feel anxious. The first thing you want to do is fix it. And we want to speed ahead to what we hope is a happy conclusion. But you need to slow down. And that feels very counterintuitive. Peter Steinke is an author and consultant for churches in conflict. He's been one of my go-to gurus in this work, and he writes, "Pain and tension are your teachers." Think about that. Seems odd, but pain and tension are your teachers as they become the needed stimuli for change. In our case church, they realized that the crumbling stonework was a metaphor for the division in their ministry goals. They had neglected their interior work as a congregation, and it wound up showing up in their building. Who knew that could happen? Now, neither side was going to convince the other they were correct. The membership was largely made up of folks from the university, and they were very skilled in academic debate, but that wasn't going to fix it. They needed something more. The first part of the saying, agree to differ, speaks to the how of proceeding through conflict. There needs to be a recognition of the humanity of those with whom we differ. They have the right to have differing views. Objectifying the other as them is the first step, but a dangerous step toward a next level of conflict, which is demonizing the other or attributing negative or suspicious motivation to those who hold views different from one's own. I once sat in a worship service in preparation for an annual meeting to follow the service. And in the course of the sermon, the pastor looked out at the congregation and started pointing his finger. And he said, "You people." And I just put my head in my hands. That meeting was not going to go well. It didn't. When we agree to differ, we allow for the possibility of learning from those with whom we differ. People who can agree to differ are free to ask questions like, "That's interesting. Can you tell me more?" The goal isn't consensus, it's mutual respect. Mutual respect. Because if mutual respect is lost, and you harden into us and them, it's very difficult. We only need to look back through church history, and as a Christian, I own this shameful history, from its earliest beginnings and the disastrous results that come from this. Now, one would expect maybe peace-loving Quakers would be an exception to this rule, but not in the town where my father's business was located, and they had a glaring example I'd like to tell you about. So this town was founded by Quakers hundreds of years ago in the 1700s. My father was a jeweler, had his own little business, and his store was across the street from the Quaker cemetery, and I frequently helped my dad at the store. And at the close of business in the old-fashioned days before electronic stuff, we took the money to the bank at the end of business for the day. We walked through a grassy area in the cemetery, but it wasn't a path. There just weren't any tombstones there. So one day my father said to me, "Do you know why there are no tombstones here? The Quakers had a feud. And they and their descendants refused to be buried next to each other. So they left this grassy area in the cemetery. Now everyone knows they couldn't get along. Edwin Freeman wrote a book in the 80s called Generation to Generation. I used to tell the clergy I worked with to sleep with it under their pillow so they could learn it by osmosis. He called this kind of behavior that causes these grassy areas in our lives, emotional cutoff. emotional cutoff. Maybe some of you have experienced that from a friend or relative. And this emotional cutoff can persist through time and become a learned behavior which some people take to the grave. To this day, no one in that town knows what that conflict was about, but everyone knows where the grassy area is through the cemetery. No one wants there to be a metaphorical grassy area in this church. Your witness as a progressive voice in this city, oh my, it's far more important than that. Far more important than that. No one wants the reputation of this church to suffer in the wider community because you don't handle your business appropriately now. And especially in these times, with everything that's going on and the news that pummels us on a daily basis, it takes all our energy to stay focused, right? And positive. We cannot allow the hateful rhetoric and devious behavior that's become commonplace in the greater society invade the lives of our religious communities. On to the second part, resolve to love. As members of religious communities, we need to hold ourselves to higher standards than even is required for public discourse. Yes, I'm holding you to a higher standard. We are called to love. This kind of love is a commitment, not a feeling. It needs to come from the very core of who we are, from the very depth of who we are. James Calvin Davis is a professor at Middlebury College, and he writes about civility both in the public sphere and in religious circles. He tells his religious readers to look back to the early church, to a practice church leaders called forbearance. You ever heard of that word? It's an old-fashioned word, forbearance. I think its meaning is relevant. It comes out of the first century. They were in conflict over whether Gentiles could be equal members to Jews in the newly emerging Christian community. Members were exhorted to forbear or hold up each other, making every effort to maintain a spirit of unity in the bond of peace. Again, forbearance is based on commitment, and theirs was a high-stakes disagreement. The sides didn't expect that those differences would dissolve, but through practicing humility and forgiveness, they were able to grow and begin to work through their differences. Now, this was a tall order, to be sure. I do not downplay that. Julia Darr is a consultant who provides resources to individuals and groups going through conflict. I recently watched a TED Talk that she did last November, and I think if you Google her name, you can watch it too. She said that a prerequisite to beginning to work through conflict is to adopt the humility of uncertainty. The humility of uncertainty. I think that's a great phrase. We need to admit that there are areas in which we might be wrong. This measure of humility is a crucial starting point to be able to learn anything new to get beyond the impasse and begin to work things out. Now, she challenges people in her methodology to find some small basis of a shared reality from which they can start their dialogue. This works well. It works well for me in my conservative neighborhood because I can easily compliment my neighbors on their flowers and their lawn when I know we completely disagree politically because we all like flowers. But religious communities, again, are called to a higher standard. So I think instead of a small shared reality, I think we need to look to the highest good, the biggest possible goal, the best dream we can possibly imagine. I base this approach on the work of someone you may have heard of, Fisher and Uri, because in the 1980s, they wrote a book called Getting to Yes. That was quickly followed by a book, Getting Past No. They find this looking to the big dream, finding one's superordinate goal. It's bigger than all the differences involved. I like to just think of it as a great big umbrella under which everyone can stand and everyone feels good and everyone feels safe. In the case of the church I was telling you about, they found this umbrella in love. They loved their church. They loved that it was quirky. They loved that it was funky. They loved where it was. They loved being outliers. And they loved being available to the community and having all kinds of people and groups parading through their building all week long. Believe it or not, this opened a window, this recognition of this shared love. And they began to work together. You know, the move to adopt the humility of uncertainty and finding this kind of love, I think it has to happen spontaneously, wondrously, serendipitously, as in the words of a very great theologian, Mrs. Potts from the musical Beauty and the Beast. Tale as old as time, true as it can be. Barely even friends, then somebody bends unexpectedly. Tale as old as time, tune as old as song, bittersweet and strange, finding you can change, knowing you were wrong. Certain as the sun rising in the east, tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme. Now, I'm a Baptist. You have to sing this with me. Beauty and the Beast. Very good. Unexpected bending. That's what our hearts long for. We Christians call it grace. It doesn't change things overnight. Nothing can do that. But things do start to change. The momentum shifts and healing begins. I certainly wish I could tell you that every congregation I worked with experienced this, but sadly that's not the case. Another church who had an enviable pile of cash and beautiful real estate could not get there. And now, that place is more of a museum than a church. All they do is give tours. The funky congregation chose to restore their building. It took years, I won't kid you, it took years and piles of money, but they got it done. And along the way, they realized that their 1850 sanctuary built for when everybody went to church, no longer really served them well, so they took out most of the pews. They left enough for their worshiping congregation, and they used that sanctuary space for other things, even dance in a Baptist church. And when all the work was completed, they hung their banner in their social hall, agree to differ, resolve to love. Now, in terms of your congregation, I do not know what conflict processes the UUA will recommend, but I can remind you of something you already know. The work that needs to be done belongs to you. Belongs to you. Your church governance is like the churches I've served. You have what's called congregational polity, which means you as a congregation are the primary decision-making body, and you have the responsibility. The UUA has a responsibility to you, but does not make decisions for you. But whatever process they use, friends, it's not going to be the Mueller investigation, okay? They will note patterns of communication, lines of responsibility. Who said what to who in an email is not going to be their focus. Why not? Because finding fault is not the point. The painful reality is that trust is broken. When that happens, no amount of evidence either way fixes it. The only thing that helps is careful, honest, deep listening and personal sharing. And a lot of unexpected bending. So I urge you, once again, I can't leave this topic alone. Put down your pens, your papers, your notebooks, your computers, and your phones, and talk to each other. Look each other in the eye and answer some important questions like, what are your hopes and dreams for this congregation? What are your hopes and dreams for this congregation? What stands in the way of achieving those for you at this time? And what do you need in order to move forward? Throughout this internal interview process, if you choose to undertake it, allow your church structure to serve you, not the other way around. Your congregation as a whole is the decision-making body. So you need to ask, does our structure work to help us achieve our big concept idea? So when everyone is clear about what this goal is for your church, it becomes the very social glue that holds you together and enables you to fulfill your ministry in this time and place. So with patience, humility, and love, may you embrace the tasks before you. May you experience the grace of unexpected bending that allows you to agree to differ and resolve to love. Blessed be.